So a maraschino cherry you may get in your beverage, or one that you receive as a glacé cherry or a candied cherry in your fruitcake. They may be grown and processed right here in Oregon. A couple key reasons, why Salem is called, the Cherry City. One is really the proximity and the climate of our area here, and the other is the proximity to Oregon State. Henderson Llewellyn, who was a very successful grower from Iowa, he had been reading the collections from Lewis and Clark and what their observations were in this beautiful growing region in the Willamette Valley, and how it would be perfect for growing fruits and vegetables. And he and his family developed what became probably one of the more successful fruit tree nurseries. And by 1851, they had over 18,000 fruit trees and really got the whole area into the fruit growing industry. Well, maraschino cherries, they date back really over 400 years, really back to when the Europeans would brine their cherries and other fruits using salt water from the Adriatic Sea. And then what they would do is add these cherries, then they would add sugar, they would add alcohol to preserve it, and then flavor it with the leaves from the Maraschino cherry tree, which gives it the name the maraschino cherry. For years, the maraschino cherry in Europe was really for the rich. It was a delicacy. And then as years progressed, they started importing maraschinos, and up until the 20s, most maraschino cherries were imported from Europe. Well, the maraschino cherry really began to change due to the Prohibition. So when Prohibition came and they eliminated the use of alcohol in a maraschino cherry to preserve it, it was then in 1925 when professor at Oregon State, Professor Wiegand, developed a method and a process that was able to brine a cherry not using alcohol, and that really developed what we see as today's maraschino cherry.
The cherries come to us in a brine state, and when they get to this point, there's been a lot of uniformity sorted, sized, and processed into the fruit. Orchard-run fruit has a lot of inconsistency in it, and maraschino is really about uniformity. What you're seeing here is pretty good likelihood it's a Royal Anne or a light-colored variety of cherry, and it's in a preserving processing brine. And this is the material that we'll load into a tank and start that processing of turning it into a sweetened maraschino cherry. So right up to this point, the fruit is being preserved in that brining solution. From this point on, the brine is separated. This is a debrining or dewatering unit. Just the dry cherries will come out of the brine. And normally there'd be some inspectors on this belt, so it's an opportunity to visually sort and inspect. And then from this point, the cherries will be pumped into tanks in our process area. This is hot process. What you see here is cherries in various stages of process. The cherries that come in, even though we put them in water, they'll still have brine in the fruit, and so they'll go through an extensive washing to get the brine, the sulfur, and the calcium salts back out of the fruit. And that's what's going on here in the yellow tank. The process of making maraschino is really basically you're taking that brine fruit and just soaking it in a progressively stronger and stronger sugar and color solution. And so over the course of that syruping schedule, you'll see the color intensity pick up as the sugar content picks up. And you can see, here's some fruit that's very early in process. It's lightly colored. You can see how much darker colored that fruit is. That's much farther along. It kind of gives you an idea. On a normal day, you'll see yellow, pink, deep red. When the tanks are finished and standardized, we unload them into the blue drums. So we go sort and spec, then it goes on to the filling section. It goes into the shaker filler. You can see the filled jars coming out, going into the syruper. We flood the jars with hot syrup. Then we'll head space the jars to head for capping. This young man is making sure the cherries are down below the syrup level. We'll do another inspection, and then they go on into the capper. This is the discharge end of our pasteurizer. So now this product has been heated up, and held at the proper temperature to give shelf stability to our product, and then it's cooled back down and onto packaging.
The Maraschino business out of Salem, Oregon is roughly a $50 million business. Over the year, we'll process probably 24 million pounds of maraschino cherries, and we'll brine almost twice that, almost 40 million pounds a year. We grow about 600 acres of brine cherries today, primarily the Royal Anne, and really that was one of the key elements that brought cherries and brought really, kind of the cherry industry to Salem. We're able to then process cherries year-round. So to do that, you use a brining technique, which is similar to brining whether you're doing pickles or other brined fruits or vegetables. It allows you to really preserve that in a state and then process it at a later time. Versus cherries, whether they're fresh cherries or fresh apples even, you have a very limited time of year when you have access to fresh fruit. I think there are some myths out there. I think that people think the maraschino cherry is some miraculously preserved product, and it's really not. And the brine process is no different than the types of sulfates you use in making wine. So really, it's a I wouldn't call it a healthy product, but I would call it something that's a tasty treat.